Hi, it's Liz from Lohas Canada. So this is a video talking about the things that I wish I knew as a beginner. I'm still a beginner, but more as a beginner medium. I'm not, learning about knits and purls, but I'm learning about how to fix my stitches, how to wear color work, a little intro to cable. So this is what I want to talk about in this video. So I do have a beginner's one. When I very first started doing garment construction, talking about just some really basic, really basic stuff. So now that I'm a little bit more got some garments under my belt, I'm still learning a ton, of course, and there's so much more to learn, but these are the things that I think would probably help you. I don't have a family member that knits, so my teaching is like on YouTube, or when we were able to get together, I was able to ask my knit group in my area. So these are the tips that I thought that might help you as well. So the very first one that I want to talk about is finding people on YouTube that you can follow depending on what skills you want to learn, what they're knitting, what your knitting style is, to really get inspiration, but then also just having that as a background noise when you're doing something else. You could be listening to their podcast. There's several podcasts that I'll put down in the description where it talks about more about techniques, different elements. Of course, you can search on YouTube for technical jargon, but really listening to those podcasts has helped me out quite a bit. Also, when I was first starting to knit sweaters or garments, I really didn't know what style I would want to wear or what would look good. So I really watched a lot of sweater haul videos of people who have knit sweaters, say in the last 20 years, or even if they've knit 50 sweaters in such a 10-year, 5-year span, that they're able to show you what looks good, what they like about it, and you could kind of understand maybe the cut will look good on you, the shape, and get a little bit of better construction and also some ideas for patterns. So that has really helped me out. So my second tip is really just slowing your pace down, not buying all the books at the shop that you think that you're going to need for knitting. So there's lots of online patterns, there's lots of free patterns, lots of blogs with different tips and tricks. So when I first started to knit garments, I went to the thrift store, and there's just tons and tons of books there, which are really great, and I was looking for more of a vintage pattern. A lot of those vintage patterns, though, I'm still not able to read fully because they assume quite a lot. So they assume you know how to construct a garment, and they're just giving you the details of how to piece together or maybe how to construct the motif. So it's not giving you step by step. So really when you're starting out, I do still have a bunch of those vintage books. They're kind of just sitting there. I mean, they are really thin, but even the books that I did get from the thrift store, I am limiting myself to liking at least 5 or more patterns in the book or the magazine, because otherwise I can just find it online and it'll save me a lot of space. So the books that I have been getting is the ones that have the technical stitches in it, or a certain technique book for knitting, or some sort of cultural book about it. So those are the ones I've been more focusing on, because you can then adapt a pattern. So once you start getting, say, into a garment that you really like and you want to knit it again, you don't have to knit the same motif. If you like the construction, you could pick a different pattern in here and incorporate it, like a scarf. You could incorporate just different stitches, and then you can see the different stitches in the book and then look it up online if you're more of a visual learner and need that extra support. So reading a chart if you're working it in the round or if you're working it flat. So say if we were working this in the round, then we would be starting at this point, or sometimes they'll have numbers. So if you're going, it's usually up. So it'll be saying 1, 1, and then you work your way up. So the first round is, say, let's say knit, purl, purl, knit, 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 and then purl, purl. And then you come back to here, you go knit, purl, purl, and you continue all the way up. That is if you're working in the round. So working flat, though, you would actually start wherever they say to start. So it's usually this corner. You would do that, and then you wouldn't start from here. You would start from this side. So you would start from here all the way across, then 2. A lot of times they'll have the numbers if you're working at flat, and then going 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you are knitting it flat and you just keep on taking it from the side, as you can see, the pattern in the chart is not the same on either side. So it's not going to look the same compared to what the pattern is written as. Alright, so you can see this is a knitted flat piece. So on this side I am knitting, this side I am purling. So if I was just knitting in the round, I would just be continuously knitting and it would look like this. But if I did a knit on this side and then I knit on this side and then I just continue to knit, it would look a very different texture. So when I first started knitting, I didn't know how to fix my stitches. I didn't know what to do. So this, we've knitted 2 and this came off, and it happens, and it came out. Alright, so now we have a loose stitch here. So what do? Sometimes I would just knit these 2 together, but that's not the right way. So what you would do, you can even do it if there's 2 of these, you would take this, and this is on a knit side, and if this was a knit, go up, and you hook that yarn through. Alright, and you come to the front again, and you hook that yarn through. Just make sure all the fibers, this one's kind of falling apart, these fibers, but you have it on your needle, you hook it to the back, hooking it to the front, and your stitches now picked up. So say we're going to pretend this one was a purl stitch. So you would just, if it slipped off and you did a purl stitch, all you would do, you can do it from the back, trying to maneuver it, but I find it the easiest way, if you can, flip over your garment. We're going to put this, if this was a purl, this piece, so we're on the wrong side, we're going to put that piece to the front, and we're going to do exactly like we did, just like that knit stitch, but on the wrong side. So this piece is on the back side, we're bringing it forward just like the knit stitch, and there we have a purl. So that again, if you drop a stitch and it comes out, then what you're going to do is pick up that stitch. If it's a knit stitch, put it at the front. You have this piece of loose fiber. So you're just going to bring that fiber through. So then it becomes a knit stitch. If that stitch was a purl, we turn it around. Bring that fiber, that loose end, to the back. With that loop at the back, bring that toward. You have a purl stitch. Alright, so here's a hand knit sweater I'm working on, and I'm using a hand dyed yarn. So even though they are the same dye lot, they produce a little bit of a different color when it's a hand dyed yarn. You can kind of see that there is a little bit of a striping going on. So say if I just knit with this ball and then use that up and then knit with that one, you're going to sometimes see an obvious color change and it's going to be a huge stripe. So to avoid that, when you get back to your round, you're just going to cross the stitches, or you're going to cross the yarns over. You can see I didn't do a good job here, but then further up I started doing a good job. So when you twist it, you want to hold both yarns just so that you get your tension right. So my tension was not right here, and that's why you can see all the little twists. It doesn't really, well, yes it does. It does show up on the side, so you can sort of see the change, and there's like a little bit of bumps. And then up here, I do much better job with my tension. So if you do have those big bumps, I find it's just because of the tension. So I'm going to knit the stitch, knit up until I switch over, right? So slide marker over. So that's the working yarn I just used. Now I don't want to use it because I want to use the other yarn. So I'm going to pick up the other yarn that's on the back. All right, it's over here. So I'm going to cross it. So this yarn is going to go over and around and back to that finger. So this is my yarn that I just used, and then this is my new yarn. And I just, for the first couple stitches, I just kind of hold it so that the tension is correct. Otherwise, I think I get a lot of those gaps that I was showing you. So, and you just keep knitting, and you can drop that yarn and you just keep knitting. Easy peasy. So, that's all it is that you're crossing the yarns so you don't get funny lattice stitch or holes or anything like that. It's more about your tension. So there's many different ways to learn how to knit, of course, and I didn't have a tutor or anything. I just learned off of YouTube. So the way I learned was, you know, you put it, this is just a knit stitch, you put it around, knit and put it around. But I knew that there was other methods, but I just needed to get that going. Now when I started to do color work though, this wasn't going to cut it because I have 2 colors or more, right? So really learning other methods and other techniques. And I've seen, you know, people with this and you see their finger high above. Now that's not really ergonomically correct. So I was trying to search and it felt really weird having the 2 fingers and having like yarn up here and yarn here and you're doing this. Did not feel right at all. So I was searching for other methods. And Arnie and Carlos, who live in Norway, or Norwegian knitters, and so they showed how they knit, and that really made a lot of sense for me. So they knit it still with the yarn over the finger, but really close to the needles. They don't have it up in the air, and then they just pick it up and pull it through. And also the purling is done with this method as well, and they just do it a little bit different. They have a really great tutorial on how to purl, but if you're knitting in the round, then I just continue with this, especially this way, because if you have the color work on the other finger, you can just hook it over. So let's talk about color work. So I really wanted to do color work, but it very much intimidated me. So I'm just going to show you, and you can see how easy it is. So we're just going to incorporate this red color. And of course, there's many different techniques. Like I was showing you the Norwegian style. So you can hold the yarn. So it's always going to come to your right side, and the tail will always be to the wrong side. So whatever that looks for you. So when you knit, we're just going to knit it. We're going to just add the yarn and knit it with the red color. That's it. Then you take your other color or whatever your pattern, you knit the other color. All right, there's different ways you can hold it, but that's as simple as that. There is different techniques like jogging. So because we're knitting in a spiral, this color isn't going to be flush when it comes back around. So if we were knitting in the round. So there's one technique that does help with the tension that I did find. So just say if I was going to be adding a red color to this very last stitch, I would just wrap the yarn. So I'm wrapping the red color around the gray because the gray is still going to be knit. And then I just knit again. Now I want to incorporate the red color, and it's just got a little anchor, so you could do it further down or higher up. Just depends. This is just when you join the yarn to it, and that will just help with the tension. And I does find it does really help with the tension, so then it's not such a huge difference if you're not holding it. Or you could just hold the end together when you're adding it. But there's just a lot of stuff going on when you're first starting, so I just like to add that in. And then you can do the gray. Well, let's be honest, we all want color work eventually, even if it's just a stripe, even though if it's just like a shape or whatever, right? So with the color work, it looks really nice on one side. There is some techniques though that might help you. So there is, when you're knitting in a circle, it actually spirals up. So there's terminology. So see here, it's my tension isn't quite correct here. So you can see that there is a gap. So that's called jogging. So it's moving it up. So there's different techniques, and that just plays with your tension. So some people like to slip the stitch in the second round. The problem with slipping the stitch is that it does weaken that area. So if you have a whole bunch of slip stitches, then if you have a really heavy garment like a sweater, that might be weighted down. So that is just figuring out the integrity of your fabric here. It's just going to be a scarf. So that's one thing to look under is jogging technique. So some other people also do picking up one or two or one stitch below, and you can knit them two together. So just different techniques. Some people just leave it, and when you weave in the ends, you just hold on tight and kind of give it some more tension so that it'll all slip through. So with this one, I could pinch the gray and tighten up my tension a little bit, and then that will shine through up here. So with this, I could hold the gray when I'm weaving in my ends, and that will help with that tension there. So say if I was knitting this in the round and I wanted to carry the float, is what it's called. So on the back side, we have, say this is a float. So on the back side, on the wrong side, we have a float. So you can have really long floats, you can have really short floats. It really just depends on your preference, how you want the garment to look, what you're going to wear it. If you have really long floats, so say if I carried this and started way over here, and I was wearing it as like a sweater, I might catch this, and my tension will probably be off, because it's just such a huge difference, and it's just gonna, you know, there's some give and some bounce to that. And if it's super tight, you're gonna have a tight garment as well. So the rule of thumb, and there's nothing set in stone, is either between 3 and 4 stitches, you wanna catch the float. So regardless, if you have a huge amount to go through, you're going to be knitting 3, and then you'll just twist the yarn so that this catches, and you would just keep knitting. So see here, if I was just carrying the yarn forward, I would then continuously knit another 3, and then I would twist the yarn again. So that's just catching your floats. It does take more time because you're maneuvering your hand and moving it as you go, but that's just a nice, neat garment, and then you won't be having tension issues as much, and then you also won't be catching yourself on those huge floats. Just looks a lot nicer and cleaner, and the more you practice, obviously, the more you get better. So these are all the crazy floats. So with the pattern, so you can see here is some really tiny floats, and then we have some really big floats. I thought I could get away with it, but if you look, if you can kind of see with the floats, they are quite wide, and that's like, I think that's 5 and then 1, 5 and then 1. So I was catching the floats because it was actually 10 across in between. And you really want to, you can kind of see my fabric is pulling a bit. So the rule of thumb that I'm going to be implementing for myself is for floats, it should be only 3 or 4 stitches and then you're crossing them. 3 or 4 stitches and then you're catching the float regardless of what's on the other side. So here you could see it's quite a large gap. So here you could do 3 and then you're just twisting your, you're catching your float. So you're just twisting the yarn over each other so it catches it, and then 3, 3, 3. And you're just going across until your next stitch. So that will really help with tension and bunching issues, and that will save a lot of headache and look a lot nicer. So really depends. I think in a lot of books and stuff in the old school way they do it, it was either 3 or 4 stitches and then catch your float, depending on maybe the motif or anything. But like, you can obviously tell this looks a lot neater than this, and this is, I think, catching every 4th float for this. It's quite a bit bumpy. There's quite a lot more floats to catch, and then there's quite a bit happening where this looks very, very neat and tidy because you're catching maybe every 2 or 3 floats. So just something to think about. And so when you're catching floats, so I have my 2 yarns here. So for my next round, it's every round is a different, for this pattern, every round is different basically. So I'm knitting 1 and then I have to do 7 pink. So I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3. And then because I want to trap my float, I'm going to bring this brown to the front. And you can either, depending on your knitting style, if you can remember, if you're conscious enough, you can keep that here and put it on. So it's just crossing it, so it's catching it, and because then I'm going this way, it's catching it in my float. If not, if I wanted to keep the pink always on my finger, then I would just loop it again or just cross it over again so it's caught, and then just keep knitting. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's talk about cabling. It sounds really scary and it sounds very complicated, but once you understand it, it's not that bad. So I think even if you don't understand it, just seeing how it works will allow you to start processing it and build up your confidence to get there, or maybe you're already there. So I'm just going to show you how it works. So here's the pattern. Knit, 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 yarn over. We're going to slip these 3 stitches over to a cable needle. This is a cable needle, so you can also just use a knitting needle, but they come in different sizes. It's much easier to slip them onto these needles. They're pretty inexpensive. I found mine at the thrift store, so it's kind of affordable now that you know what they look like. Then you're going to knit, knit, knit 3 stitches, and then you're going to knit these 3 stitches. So they're crossing over, yarn over, and then you continue the rest of your pattern. So I will show you what that looks like. It wasn't until it was drawn out for me like this that I really understood how it was supposed to happen. So we're going to knit 3, and you'll just be working whatever pattern. It says to yarn over. So depending on your yarn over, you could have the yarn over at the back, the yarn at the front. So it really just depends, and then that makes it more secure. Bring it around back to the back. So we have a yarn over, and then we're going to be slipping those 3 stitches, the next 3 stitches, onto a cable needle. So I don't know which way is actually technically correct, but I just 1, 2, 3. And see with the little hook, they just stay there. So depending on if you don't have a cable, you can also just use another knitting needle, but it just makes it a lot easier. Then you're going to knit. Yarn is at back for knitting. Then you're just going to knit the next 3. 1, 2, 3. Now those stitches, I just bring them, so I want to knit this first one, so 1, 2, 3. So with this cable needle, I was able to put them on this way, so that was the first stitch, second stitch, third stitch. So right now, if I just bring it down to here, I'd be knitting this third stitch, second stitch, and first stitch, but I just want to bring it back and round, so then I'm actually knitting the very first stitch that I put on. So that's the benefits of having the cable needle. Alright, so you're just going to maneuver that cable needle. You're just going to 1, 2, 3. So I can just knit it with the cable needle. And there you go, it's now twisted the stitches over. Then you would just continuously knit the rest of the pattern. You come back to that section, you do it again. So you can also add some like stitch markers so you know that this section is for your cable. So that'd be a really good way to do it. So that also makes a big difference if you made a mistake in your cables. So if you have stitches on both sides and you have your cables, but your cables don't look too right, then what you can do is go back and you can, instead of ripping out multiple rounds, you already have the 2 markers of how many stitches there should be in there, and then you just take another knitting needle or a cabling needle and just make sure that you take off the stitches and then you just continue to cable up. So same as we did, we fixed our stitches in the middle of the knit round. You can do that as well with the cable. So you just have to, instead of going back the entire way, make sure that stitches are secure on each side. So just making sure they're both on needles, and then you're able to come and fix your stitches. So we can do that again. I just pulled them all out. So we just have yarned over. Stitches are now back on that side. We're going to take our cable needle, put the stitches 1, 2, 3. Then I knit the next 3 stitches. One, 2, 3. Bring those stitches back to the other side. So I want to do this stitch first. It was our first stitch. Bring it back over. Do a little bit of a twist. Bring it back up. And we're going to knit. So that's it for the cabling. So there's many different types of cabling. That's just the concept of it, that you're twisting the stitches different directions, just depending on your cable pattern that you're using. So I hope you have enjoyed this video and have learned some things and are willing to experiment a little bit more. Of course, these are not all the tips that I have learned as we keep going and progressing, but just really some of the things that have really fudged me up. I've had to rip back, I've had to relearn, and that I'm hoping will help you as well. So I will talk to you later. Bye!